This program is brought to you in part by Monterey Credit Union, serving citizens of the Central Coast and Salinas with 6 offices. Thank you, Monterey Credit Union, for supporting local public television on Access Monterey Peninsula.
Hello, my name is Shelley Aliotti.
And I'm John McCleary. We started a project in the last several years to record autobiographical histories of Monterey County people.
At this time, we have 37 digital videotapes of individuals who have had interesting stories of their lives on the Central California coast.
Over the next few years, we will be airing these recorded histories here on Access Monterey Peninsula, your public access television station for the Central Coast.
We hope you will enjoy getting to know more about this interesting community and its people.
This show features Hank Ketcham, internationally famous local cartoonist and creator of Dennis the Menace. Please enjoy.
Hi, my name is Hank Ketcham. I was born in Seattle, Washington on the 14th of March, 1920. From there, I grew up in Seattle, got used to the gentle rain that falls and the beautiful scenery and fresh air. And after my first year at the University of Washington, I decided that I wasn't learning anything there that I was really interested in. What I wanted to do was to go down to work with Walt Disney and help him out with Pinocchio and some of those great productions that he was behind at the time. So I hitchhiked down the coast to LA and eventually wound up at Universal Studios and then over to Disney's. Just about a year or two prior to that, I drove down with the sheriff's son, who was a friend of mine. He and his father drove down to San Francisco for the opening of the Golden Gate Bridge. And so we crossed, and we were the 6th car across the Golden Gate Bridge on a north-south direction. Which didn't mean much to me at the time because I didn't realize that there's such a historical place, but it certainly was. And then I remember being in California, down around Palo Alto, and smelling the orange blossoms. And I just couldn't believe that any place in the world could be this gorgeous. It's really, truly heaven. I thought, well, I better come back here. And so a year or two later, and actually in 1938, I came down to LA and eventually worked in the studios. Then went to war after Pearl Harbor, and I enlisted in the Navy and was sent back to Washington, D.C. as a photographer's mate because they thought I was a Disney boy. I probably should be hooked up with pictures of some kind. Fortunately, the photo lab wasn't completed at Anacostia Field near Washington at the time, but somebody had heard that I was in Washington and we were going to borrow me. So I went over to the Navy Department, the Office of the Secretary of the Navy, and worked in the war bond allotment program, doing things I'd never done before, writing pamphlets and doing illustrations and putting out a magazine. And holy smoke, I was really had to be a fast learner, which I was, and I was just a sailor going in, and they made me a chief in no time at all, so I could kind of work with the officers and not be stopped for any, just because I was a sailor with a white hat and no place to go. And so that was wonderful. And then at the same time, I did a little moonlighting in New York with my cartoons. I learned to at Disney's, of course, drawing all the time, but this is the first time I tried to do the little single-panel cartoons that go in the back of the magazines many years ago, Saturday Evening Post, Collier's, and New Yorker, that kind of thing. I made a few sales up there so that when the war ended, I thought, well, you know, I'm not going to go back to Disney's and that $30 a week job. I'm going to have to go up to New York and see what I can do to impress the editors. And so I did. I went up to, actually lived in Westport, Connecticut, which was a lot of artists and illustrators worked there at the time. And was able to go into New York at least once a week to visit the editors and meet a lot of my fellow cartoonists, many of whom we're still friends with. And that was very exciting, but then all of a sudden we went through a heat wave and ice storms, and I thought, holy smokes, there must be a better place to live than this. And I remembered California very quickly, and I called my friend Vip Parch, with whom I worked at the studios, and he said, I'm up here in Northern California, I'm in Carmel Valley, come on up here, this is where all the action is. I thought, Carmel Valley, that sounds good. I remember being in Carmel only once, and that was in about 38, when I drove up from when I was down in LA with Disney's, with a friend of mine who was in the advertising business and was taking a display up to San Francisco, so he wanted some company. And he said, Hank, have you ever seen Carmel? And I said, no, I never have. He was a former Stanford boy, so he knew it very well. So he said, well, let me show you. So we drove up the coast and made that turn on Ocean Avenue and saw that magnificent display of pine trees and ocean, and it was gorgeous. And so we drove down through town and looked around, and we wound up sleeping in the sand at the foot of Ocean Avenue. And I just thought, this is a sensational village. I just hope I can get back here one day. And 10 years later, I did come back, drove back from Connecticut to Carmel Valley, and eventually settled in Carmel. And those were really the good old days, because I remember Alan Knight, who was a former president or mayor of Monterey, and he was in real estate after that, and he sold me on the idea of buying a lot and a house. This is in 1948. Buying a lot and a house for $12,000 in Carmel Woods. I can't believe that right now, but that's what happened. That's how I got started living out here, and it worked out beautifully. And then I moved out to the Carmel Valley later, and after the war, when I left Washington, went up to Westport, Connecticut, and was in and out of New York, I was doing this freelance work, doing little cartoons for the magazines and little advertising. And I did one that ran in the Ladies' Home Journal for about 3 years. It was called Half Hitch. He was a short sailor with big eyes, and it was all pantomime, but it kind of brought me in, got me into that freelance business. But the weather pattern was not to my liking, and I thought, well, if I'm doing so well here in New York and I'm only coming in once a week, I don't know why I can't do it from the West Coast. So when I got out here, I continued to send in the drawings to the magazines, and doing quite well. And this is in 1948. And a couple of years went by, and one day my wife stormed into my studio, which is one of the extra bedrooms in the house, and pounded her fist on my drawing board and hissed at me, "Your son is a menace," and then turned and slammed the door on her way out. She couldn't be contained. She was just ready to burst. I thought, holy smokes, Dennis, a menace? Whoops. And when those words collided, I thought, well, wait a minute. Now, you clean it up. I'm going to make some rough drawings. And I had a bunch of ideas ready to go that concerned kids. I was already doing a lot of kid ideas, having a little upstart around the house anyhow. So I sent in a batch of rough drawings to my representative in New York, and a short time thereafter, he sent a telegram. We were doing telegrams then. And said that send me another week's batch. I think we've got a sale to the New York Post Hall Syndicate. And I thought, well, that's beautiful. So I got launched in. I created Dennis in 1970. 1950, And in 1951, in March, he was released to 18 newspapers. And it was hardly enough. We weren't going to be able to really get started until we had a few more papers. But the Chicago Tribune came in and said, we'll take it on a daily basis and we'll pay you $100 a week. I thought, wow, boy. So there was dancing in the streets, and the first year we zoomed up quickly, and we're in the top 100 markets. And Dennis was very, very popular, and they made this television series of Dennis, which I really was not anxious to do, because being a former Disney man, I wanted to have it in animation. But the people who had all the power in those days said, no, we want to get this going. Columbia's ready to do this. And so I went down and worked through some of the casting problems and look at the scripts, and then that's when I left for Europe. And I never did see Dennis on television, but I got it, of course, on tapes and on film. I've been very fortunate in being, I won the equivalent of the Oscar, I guess it is, in 1952 for Dennis. It was called the Billy D. Beck Award. And later on they changed it to another name called Rube Goldberg. It's called the Reuben, yeah. And I won that later on, and then I've been receiving accolades and plaques and awful lot of flattering things all through the years. And then later on, this is a little guy that has been keeping me in trouble all these years. And this is a biography I did a few years ago with Abbeville Press, and it describes all of the progression of how he grew, and all of my travels around the world. And that was kind of refreshing to get it all down in paper, and so the kids will know when they grow up where their old man has been, and you know why he acts so funny. When the Crosby tournament came up from the south near San Diego, it came up here in 1947, and Ted DeRine was the one who was editor of the Monterey Herald, was the one who called him up and suggested that would he like to bring his tournament up here. Sam Morse, who ran the Del Monte properties, was very enthusiastic, of course, because it's a very dead time of the year in January, February. So Bing was already a member of Cypress Point here, and of course knew the beauty and the possibilities of being here on the peninsula with these celebrities and professionals. So it all started then, and the programs they put out in those days, it looked like something that a high school had put out. It just bothered me terribly. So I said, come on, let me help you with this stuff. So I designed some of the programs for them in the early days. And I remember one of them, I had a whole bunch of golfers in funny putting positions on it in the background, and slashed across the whole cover was $10,000. That was the big money pot there, that the winner of the Pro-Am got $2,500, and but I mean that's the way it was in those days, and then it gradually went up and up. Actually, in the early days, Bing would have all these marvelous volunteers that came in who lived in the peninsula. We couldn't have done it without them, and still can't. We had the volunteers and the players get together for a clam bake, and we called it a clam bake, and it was just a great big evening with a lot of good eating and drinking and singing, and it was just marvelous. And then a couple of years later, the IRS came to Mr. Crosby and said, that's not a promotional piece, that's not public relations, you can't write that off, you're going to have to pay for it yourself. So that's when we started to make a foundation out of this thing. And then the foundation, whole idea just blossomed beautifully. And since then, millions of dollars have been distributed around the peninsula as a result of the AT&T. In 1954, I believe it was, when I had a studio in Monterey, and a couple of assistants who were with me then, we were putting out a comic book as well as the newspaper feature. I got a phone call from the Monterey, the junior chamber. And they wanted to know if I just put out a book. And they wanted to know if I could if I would autograph some of those books so they could raise money to build a playground. And I said, well, what do you mean build a playground? What do you mean by that? And they said, well, you know, the rings and swings and teeter-tot. Wait a minute, hold the phone. I said, you let me design the playground, and I'll give you as many books as you can sell. Give them to you. Holy smokes. And they said, thanks a lot, Hank, and hung up, and there I was with my foot in my mouth, not really realizing the enormity of what I had said. So I was lucky to get Arch Garner, who was a very good sculptor and designer who lived here in the peninsula, and I got Arch on the team. And so we designed strange shapes and things for the kids to play on. And it was supposed to be a playground of do's, not don'ts. Don't do this. It's do anything you want. And a lot of these things we didn't even give them, we didn't want to tell them how to play on it. We just gave them a shape and let them go into it. Some of the little kids, it was a big cavern and a hiding place. To others, it was a spaceship. And then I wanted to get, I was grown up in Seattle, not within a lot of hearing of the railroads in the old Northern Pacific. The great sound coming around at night. And so I realized that kids really aren't going to even get close to a steam engine anymore. Maybe it'd be nice if we could call up the Southern Pacific and see what they could do. And I found out they had a beautiful steam engine up in the backwoods somewhere up in Nevada. So I called up, and they said, I'm sorry, Mr. Ketcham, but listen, this is worth $6,000 in scrap, just sitting there. And I said, well, listen, Mr. Southern Pacific, if you get that guy down here, it'll be worth $60,000 in public relations immediately. And he said, well, let me call you back. So I went through, and they brought it down, and at Fort Ord, the engineers are over there, and they made this a project to take the train across town in a driving rainstorm and put it in placement there that they had prepared before at the Dennis Park, the playground. So that was marvelous. And then they had, next to it, there was the Bing Crosby Youth Center, which Bing had put up there. So we take care of the teenagers and then the little youngsters in the same area. And it was very successful. And you know, mothers would leave their children there at the park. There was no big rails or anything to keep them from going out. But they'd go out and shop and come back in an hour, and their kids, they knew their kids were going to stay there, not going to go away from that place. And so, and it's still going very well. It has to be, you know, painted and kicked around a little bit, but it's still a very big, successful thing. I was delighted with that. Now this is Half Hitch, the little guy with the big eyes. The googly eyes. And this is one that, a series that ran weekly in the Saturday Evening Post back in 1946. And here he is again with a stork who would rather be carrying a lightweight baby, I'm sure, than this missile. So Half Hitch was very popular, but very difficult to dream up because pantomime is a toughie. But I managed to get some good visuals. Let's see what we've got here. We've got, this is for True magazine. It's kind of funny. The trouble is, all the cowboys in your story are a bunch of ignorant, bloodthirsty savages. Now we got some dentists. We jump right up here to Dennis, and he said, maybe you should take up bowling. The balls are a lot easier to find, which is probably what a lot of good golfers feel when they play Pebble Beach. And here's Santa Claus. Of course, he's a regular visitor. I make a big deal out of Christmas because kids at that age certainly do. Whenever I try to be good, everyone thinks I'm up to something. And we have another one here where he says, and God bless Ruff. Now stay tuned to the nightly bedtime story. Amen. Ernie Gann was a friend of mine, and he used to live right in this area for many years. One of the great writers, wrote High and the Mighty and a lot of great things like that. He, in addition to being a flyer and a sailor, he was also interested in painting. He tried to get me to paint since the 1968 or 70s. Come on, Hank, just grab a brush and it's fun. I said, oh no, it's too messy and takes too much time. So finally, he gave me, in 1984 or 5, he gave me his set of paints and brushes. It has kind of a thing you can use outside. It has a portable easel. And he said, here, now you do it and let me see what you can do with it. I said, thanks, Ernie, you're nice. Thanks for the thought. And I put it in the corner. 2 years ago, I felt that I'd climbed to the top of the cartoon mountain. I'd satisfied myself that I had done a good job and that I looked around and there's nowhere to go except the other mountain over there. So I said, well, what am I going to do? Get over that? That looks like a lot of paint and easels and smocks and dirty pants, but it'll be different. There'll be no deadlines, and I've always wanted to paint, never did take it up. But I did, fortunately, train some assistants who were very capable youngsters, and I finally got 2 of them that took over the strip. Marcus Hamilton is one who lived down in Charlotte, North Carolina, and Ron Ferdinand, who does the Sunday pages, upstate New York. And we all have our own fax machine. So every morning, the fax machine buzzes for about an hour, and they're sending me the script, and I'm changing this or throwing this out, or a drawing saying, hey, put his arm up here, not down here, can't you see, and all these mother hen type of things that I have to do. Pretty hard to let go of your baby, and I'm gradually, they're getting better, and in my eyes, and that's the important thing, I guess, that I can eventually let go. The ideas now, anyone in the humor business is absolutely out of their mind if they try to do everything themselves. Everyone, certainly, the people in the theater and television, all the comedians and the nightclub people, they all have writers. Hope had 15 writers when he was on doing his radio show. And from the very beginning, of course, I did write my own material, but then as it appeared in the papers and magazines, I would receive letters and notes from gag writers saying, hey, can you use some of this stuff? They'd bring it in little 3x5 cards and numbered, and so I started using work from gag writers, which worked out marvelously because I had about 15 different minds working once they knew the character, and it just swelled. And then I'd receive maybe a package of 15 ideas, and I might choose only one or two. I was pretty selective, and still am, but I wanted to get the very best. And if it didn't quite fit, I'd trim it up here and tweak it, and it would work. But I didn't lie in bed at night twitching my toes, worrying about what Dennis was going to do tomorrow, because I had some fine professionals who preferred cash to credit, and they're the guys that are keeping America laughing most of the time. I have never really have a high regard for writers. And then along about 1990, I said, you know, maybe he's got something there. And I started to give more and more work to my assistants and give me a little bit more time to investigate this thing. So I started to paint due to Ernie Gann's insistence, and I got a lot of support from everybody else who thought I could do fine. And I know what layout and design is and figures, but the color is a whole new ball game for me. So it had taken me quite a while to get onto it, but I've been very lucky. This is one I did recently of Cypress Point. This is from the 9th tee, looking down on the 13th and the first hole coming down here in the ocean, and I enjoy doing that. I've played golf all my life, but I figured that after 60 years you haven't got it, get into something else. And then I'm very much interested in jazz, and I have a lot of musicians and jazz people that I have painted, and I mainly just, you know, paint what I like. This is Art Tatum.
Art Tatum.
Yeah, I used to listen to Art Tatum in Los Angeles in the early 40s. He'd be playing there, and at night he'd come in, and his dog would come in and lie under the table, under his piano rather, because Art was blind and he needed to have the dog, but boy could he play the piano. So I don't seem to run out of things to do.
No.
Just a plain piece of paper.
What do you want?
Just a plain
What are
piece
you
of.
going to put on it?
You're going to write in it so I can put it in the book I get.
Well,
Put to Shelley.
I'll tell you what, you put these back.